This is the My Campaign Coach podcast, where we talk about how to win elections. Every week, we let you hear straight from the best consultants, operatives, and candidates in the game, all for one reason, to help you win. For more information about how we can help you win, visit mycampaigncoach.com. Now, here's your host, Raj Schaefer.
Welcome to the My Campaign Coach podcast. This episode, we're talking to Brendan Steinhauser, a national grassroots organizer and campaign manager with a fantastic record. Brendan spent 7 years in Washington, D.C., working as the National Director of Federal and State Campaigns for FreedomWorks, and he's managed a number of campaigns from state to federal level since then. Since 2012, Brendan has operated the Austin-based Steinhauser Strategies with his bride, Randan. A native of Flatonia, Texas, Brendan has earned his undergraduate degree from the University of Texas and served as the Executive Director of Young Conservatives of Texas in UT Austin. Brendan received his Master's in Statecraft and International Affairs from Institute of World Politics in Washington, D.C. And with that, Brendan, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
It is our pleasure. Now give us a bit of background as far as what you're currently involved in and what you guys are doing there at Steinhauser Strategies.
Sure. Well, we started our company about 4 years ago after moving back from Washington back home to Texas. And, my wife and I both have worked in the political and policy worlds and decided that we could team up on our various skill sets and build a company that can offer kind of a full service for candidates, but also for causes. And so a lot of our work is actually with nonprofits. So we do a lot to help them get their issues in front of legislators, everything from building the websites, designing the pamphlets and materials, to heading up their communication strategies, working on their grassroots outreach, and doing government affairs work as well inside the Capitol. So we sort of provide a full service shop for causes like school choice, property tax reform, issues like that. But we also help candidates. And we've helped candidates in races from everything from justice of the peace or city council races all the way up to United States Senate. And so there are a lot of commonalities, I think, when it comes to campaigns and when it comes to helping nonprofits kind of get started, build an organization, raise money, develop a message, and drive the message to the audience that you need to win. And so those different skills and those different services kind of go hand in hand, whether you're looking at helping a candidate or a cause. But it's been a blast. We've been back in Austin now for 4 years, and we've really enjoyed being back here and taking some of the skills that we learned in D.C. and around the country and applying those to our community here in Texas.
So since being back in Texas and getting back into the good old Lone Star State, you've not only been involved in helping these campaigns and organizations, but you've also done a lot to help train new generations of conservative activists and candidates and try to help provide people with an opportunity to get involved and learn more about effective activism. Tell me a little bit more about what you're doing on that front.
So about a year and a half ago, I sat down with one of my clients, Young Americans for Liberty, and we decided that there was a big need for training the next generation of liberty leaders, conservative activists, and future candidates. So we started an organization called Liberty Action Texas. And the idea was basically to provide a training ground for the future operatives in Texas, for future candidates, and for people that want to fight for causes that they believe in. So many people are probably familiar with the Leadership Institute run by Morton Blackwell in Arlington, Virginia. And both of us have gone through their trainings and have provided guest lecturing and things like that. So we kind of took that model, added a few things here and there, and decided to start this organization focused on Texas. And over the past year and a half, we've trained thousands of young activists and future political operatives, campaign managers, and future candidates as well, with an emphasis on college campuses, but also young professionals around the state. And we found that there's a big need for that training, whether it's how to run an organization, how to run for office, how to do digital media effectively, and those sorts of things. And what's interesting is that as we started to do that with young people, we actually started to see more and more older voters and older activists come to us and ask for that training. So we've actually trained a number of older folks as well in things like Facebook and Twitter and using voter data effectively to get a message out. So it's been a really interesting project and very successful so far, just in terms of providing training that a lot of people have never had before and just haven't had the opportunity to utilize.
Well, that's one of the things that I'm really passionate about. Part of what started My Campaign Coach, kind of the advent of that idea, and one of the reasons why I wanted to have you on this show is that I think we need to have more of those resources out there. Whether you're looking at a college kid that thinks they might want to help out on a campaign someday, or as the next state rep or next congressman that needs to come and get trained on how to the mechanics of those campaigns and how they can be a good candidate. And there's just not enough stuff out there about that. And I love that you're here in Texas, focused on the good old Lone Star State to help make that happen.
Sure. One of the things that I noticed, in the 2014 cycle was that I was helping a lot of younger campaign managers around the state who I would meet at events and they would say, "Hey, can you just give me a call and help me out with something? I have some questions for you. I want to get your take on things." And I started to just sort of mentor some of these younger operatives who were right out of college, who didn't have a lot of experience in campaigns other than a little bit of volunteer work. And so I kind of helped them out, and one thing led to another, and that's when I really learned that there was this need. There are some good consultants here in the state, and there are some very good volunteers as well. But finding those young operatives that are right out of college, or this is their first job in politics, and they're passionate and eager, but they're looking for the help, they're looking for the knowledge and experience that we can offer them to ensure that they can be the best campaign operative possible for their candidate. So that's been a really rewarding experience for me.
That's a key part of the legacy that I think both of us want to pass on, is being able to help mentor, much like you and I were mentored by former other political operatives and the folks that had huge formative influences on us and our philosophy. We want to be able to pass that on. And so I love that through Liberty Action Texas and through My Campaign Coach, we're taking an active role in helping prepare that next generation. That is really cool. Tell me a little bit more about what actually keeps you engaged. Politics is a tough game. You're doing this with your family, your wife's involved, you're involved, you got a 4-month-old little girl. What is it that motivates you to stay engaged and fighting in this tough game?
It's still the same thing that got me involved in the first place. It really is the ideas of conservatism, of liberty. And, it sounds sort of philosophical when you first get involved, but, just in the past few weeks, we've seen the problems with Obamacare, for example. And that's affected myself, that's affected my family, seeing the premiums go up, seeing we're getting dropped from our health insurance provider because of this disaster. And so you look at things like that affect you in the real world. You look at your property taxes that you have to pay and how high they are and where the money goes and how the money's spent. And every day that I sort of get frustrated with politics, with sort of the game or the business of politics, you run into some frustration here and there. I think back to that and I say, why did we get involved in the first place? We got involved to change public policy, to create more liberty, more economic opportunity for everybody. But at the end of the day, it goes back to those pocketbook issues for me. It goes back to our tax rate. It goes back to what every level of government is spending our tax dollars on, how the government affects our health care and our freedom. And so anytime that I'm kind of, down in the dumps or something, or have had a long week or a long month, I go back to why did we get involved? We got involved to fight for ideas that affect real people and can improve the lives of all Texans.
Yeah, it doesn't take much further than looking at your mortgage statement and seeing how much you're having to put aside for property taxes, or looking at Obamacare and having to change insurance companies to be a good reminder in many of those cases for us.
Absolutely. It's just, one thing after another, one interaction after another with the government, especially as a small business owner too. It's something that we've really learned over the past few years is just how much money, comes out of our business and what we could do with that money if we didn't pay the federal government, if we were able to put more of that into hiring people and to providing benefits to workers, to investing back in the company. So it's just a real reminder. And I think that so many people get involved in politics because of the ideas, and then they sort of, forget that. So I think it's a good reminder for us all.
Well, I appreciate that there are folks like yourself that stay involved in this game, not just for a paycheck, but that it truly does stay about the principles. And I like to surround myself with people like that, and that's part of why I love having you on here today. Talk to me a little bit more about what you guys do at Steinhauser Strategies. It's public relations, government affairs, political consulting. Break that down a little bit more for our listeners about what services you provide and how you try to work with campaigns and organizations.
Sure. When it comes to campaigns, we do some general consulting, and we do work for, again, candidates who are running for city council, for district attorney, for Congress. We really approach each race differently and each campaign differently, but we kind of provide your general strategic advice, and then we try and help them set up processes and systems to improve upon their campaign. So, some of these folks are brand new candidates, and we have to kind of start from scratch and build their website, get their fundraising apparatus going, bring on vendors to help with the campaign, teach them how to be an effective candidate. develop messaging. I mean, all those sorts of things. And then others we come into, and they've already got a structure set up. Maybe they've been in office for some time and they want to improve on their digital capabilities, or they want to improve in the grassroots world. And so we come on to help them with that and open doors and teach them how to do these things, but also provide those services. On the nonprofit side of things and the public relations side, that's a lot of fun as well. We really see ourselves as a company that helps in the nonprofit startup world, if you will. So an organization that wants to fight for lower property taxes, for example, or fight for school choice. We've had a number of opportunities to help organizations get off the ground, build the website, develop the materials, get out a press release, to get some earned media about the organization, make the hiring decisions for the organization. And really our hope is that with a lot of these organizations that are fighting for a cause, we can help them get started, get them to become a well-oiled machine, and really then eventually just go to strategic advising so that they can run things on their own, so that we can come in and help them, but that they are self-sustainable for the long term. And again, I kind of borrowed that approach a little bit from Morton Blackwell with the Leadership Institute, and that idea of helping an organization get started and off the ground, servicing it, and then eventually moving on to start another organization that's fighting for another cause.
I love that you guys focus so much on making sure that both campaigns and organizations have the logistical backside set up strong, because I think too many campaigns and organizations, they start from a position of ideals and principles, which is awesome. Guys like yourself and myself do, but they don't think about the day-to-day logistical framework they got to have to be effective. And if you don't have that, you're not going to get elected, or at least it's not going to be pretty, and your organization is not going to last long. And that's so important what you guys are doing. Where do you start with that? If you're starting to a campaign and you're helping them get set up, what are some of those first steps you have them go through to making sure that logistical back end is, and the framework of that campaign is set up right?
Sure. Well, I think, one of the first things you have to do is get all of your paperwork filled out, right? Fill out the necessary paperwork, set up the bank account, file with the appropriate entity, those sorts of things. Buy your domains so you can start putting together a website, create your Facebook page, obviously raise money, talk to your friends and supporters, especially at the local level. Make a list of all the people that can give you money. Make sure that you're starting to make those calls to get the funds in so you can do some of these basic things. So it's really just looking at it from the perspective of, we have kind of 10 different silos of things that we need to do, including fundraising, communications, grassroots, materials, financial and ethics and that sort of thing. And just starting to build them all at the same time so that it's all kind of moving together in a parallel fashion. And oftentimes what happens is people decide to run late too, so they don't put in this work early, and so they're sort of scrambling to do all of this at once. That happens so often, and it's not ideal, but I think if you've done this enough times, you can kind of provide them with the guide to say, okay, here are the things we need to get done, and every day do a little bit of all these things. But when you do it that way and you build a systematic approach, within a short number of weeks, you're up and running, you have money in the bank, you're able to start going out there and actually campaigning. And then you kind of create a system where it all kind of is integrated, and these things sort of help each other out. So the more earned media you get, or the better you're doing on communications online, the more money that's coming in. The more money that's coming in, the more people you can reach with your message. And so it's sort of a feedback loop that really is important. But it's unbelievable how many people, that we've worked with at the start that, don't realize that you need to go get voter data. You need to go get a database of voters to talk to. So just basic things like that, and putting those in place in a cost-efficient, cost-effective way, I think, are some of the first things that we try and do.
And there's so many questions and so many small things you have to do in order to get on the ballot, let alone run an effective campaign, that a lot of candidates that don't have that prep time and put in the training and the pre-work, they lose sight of a lot of that. There was one guy that I know that I was aware of that this last cycle, he didn't realize when the deadline was to actually be on the ballot, and he nearly missed it. He literally had to drive his campaign manager had to drive his packet down to the Republican headquarters in Austin to get registered literally on the last day because he thought he had a couple more weeks. It was, that's the kind of thing you don't want to have happen. It's worse to not be on the ballot, but it's pretty bad to lose sight of that. That should be on your campaign calendar from prior to your launch date. You should know what you have to do and have it as part of that strategic calendar.
That's exactly right. In fact, I heard a story of a county chairman, a Republican Party county chairman, who, of course, was in charge of filing the the paperwork for folks who wanted to run for county chairman in his county. And he had an opponent. He filed her paperwork appropriately and in the right timeline, and he filed his paperwork inappropriately and therefore was disqualified.
That's hilarious. Oh,
so it's really important that you get the basics right.
Absolutely. On one of the previous episodes, we talked to Tony McDonald, and he was sharing a story about a guy that tried to run as a Democrat for lieutenant governor. I think it's Kerry Katz or something like that. And he had this press conference down in Austin in front of a shuttered jewelry store. He thought it was in the open. And then he went with the whole press corps down to the Capitol trying to find the office he filed for office in, not realizing that it was the Democrat headquarters. And none of the press folks told him. They just videotaped him and watched him walking around in vain trying to find the place to register. So I wish I could go back and find video of that, because that sounds like a fun time. And
this is where hiring good staff and good consultants is important. Having people that can do that work for you, and they don't have to be super expensive. If they're competent, they're able to help or volunteer their time even. You need people around you that are looking out for you, that are doing advanced work, that are doing the kinds of blocking and tackling that you just have to do if you're going to run a successful campaign for any office.
So, Brendan, as a guy that really focuses on the principle side of politics, and that's what motivates you, I'd imagine you won't work with just anybody. You have some ideas of specific types of people you will work for or won't. What do you use, or how do you decide who you're going to work for, who you're not going to work for, how you're going to pick your clients?
Sure. It's kind of a case-by-case basis, but I usually go with the 80% rule. I feel like there's some issues that we'll probably disagree with a client on, whether it's an organization or a candidate. If they share my values, if they're good people, if they generally are conservatives who are trying to fight for what's best with the country, with the city, with the county, then, I'll take that client on. If they're an improvement in their opponent, and they're moving the ball in the right direction, that's the kind of client that we want. And I've certainly had disagreements with clients over public policy, over votes, over who they voted for president, and we've had those conversations. And I have a pretty open line of communication with clients to say, here's what I believe. Here are the things that are important to me. Here are some of the politics of those ideas. And, what do you think? What issues do you care about? How do you intend to vote? Those sorts of things. But, even my mom, who I helped elect to the city council in our hometown of Flatonia, there have been things where we've disagreed, at the dinner table. And I kind of joke with her about maybe she should find a new consultant. But, that's going to be normal. But, I know that if our clients and if the candidates we're working with are fighting for the betterment of their community and they're fighting for conservative ideas generally, we'll look into taking that on. And we have turned down work that we disagree with. We have had some opportunities to have to do work with clients that wanted us to grow government, and we just said that's not something we're interested in doing. It's not why we got involved in the business. And you can certainly go hire somebody else for this, but keep us in mind for future projects. I
really respect that. Having those kind of standards, there are far too few consultants out there that do it. It becomes about the paycheck. And granted, it's a hard living to make. It's a hard business to be involved in. And it's cyclical enough that oftentimes it's tough to turn down those big checks, because oftentimes, I know, at least in my case, the people that I've turned down in the past, they've oftentimes been the ones with the fattest checkbook. And it's tough to do that. But if you have those principles you go back to and the values that you're closely tied into, you can definitely look yourself in the mirror a lot easier at night.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And it everybody has to sort of make their own decision about that. And I know some folks who are purely hired guns and they've made that decision. I know other people who are similar to us that, won't take on every project or every client. And it's really, up to you. And I'm not going to, if somebody has a health situation in the family or they've got to make ends meet, I'm not going to judge them for doing that. I hope that I'm never in that position and that I can always be in the position to be able to turn down some work that doesn't necessarily agree with my principles. But it's up to everybody to sort of make those determinations. And, that's all that you can do.
You're exactly right. When you're looking at a campaign, not just a client, but when you're analyzing a campaign as an observer or somebody's coming in to help make it better, what are the top attributes you look for, kind of the indicators to give you an idea of whether it's healthy or needs help or is on a failing track?
Sure. Well, one of the first things I look at is this a winnable race? I've met a lot of good candidates, a lot of people that are very passionate, that are smart and articulate, that have the ability to either self-fund or raise money. and they're running in a congressional seat or they're running in a countywide campaign that they just have a very low chance of winning. And I talk to these candidates every cycle, and I encourage them to look at running for a different office. I encourage them to complete their campaign and then think about maybe running for something else in the future. But that's the first step. And I think that's something when I was at FreedomWorks that we struggled with quite a bit. You'd have people come in all the time running for Congress all over the country, and they were great folks, and they shared our values and said all the right things and signed the pledges and all those things. But they were running in a race that was, a 60%, 65% Democratic voting history. And so we had scarce resources. And when you work for an economist, as I did, they always talk about the scarcity of resources being, scarcity being the first law of economics. And so we couldn't help everybody. We had to pick and choose. So I would say that's the most important thing. And then from there, you're looking for who is a good candidate. At the end of the day, not many consultants will admit this, but there are so many things that we don't control. There's so many things that we can't control in campaigns. So having a good candidate, somebody that has name ID, that has respect, that has a good message and is qualified for the job, that's something that's extremely important and at the top of my list, because there are things that we can do to help them get elected. There are things we can do for any candidate that will help them get closer. But at the end of the day, if you don't have a good candidate or you don't have somebody who has a chance of winning, then the rest of it's just almost a moot point.
Yeah, there are some things you just can't overcome. And having a 65% Democrat district in a non-wave election year is definitely one of them. There's one guy we trained early on. He's actually in the state legislature here in Texas now. And he came through our training program, and he was going to run against a longtime incumbent congressman in a Republican primary. And the first piece of advice that myself and my boss gave him was, one, don't run for Congress, run for State House. You actually have a chance of winning there. And second of all, you're probably going to lose your first race for State House, but be prepared to run again if you're serious about this. And just with the idea he was going to be starting from zero name ID, zero fundraising experience, no infrastructure. And sure enough, that's what he did. He ran for State House and lost. He came back the next time and absolutely just swept the field in a multi-candidate race against an incumbent. He won without a runoff. And it was because he learned so much from that first time, and he's a tenacious fighter for liberty. And he was able to sweep the deck. It was awesome. But
wow,
without that, he didn't have a chance in hell going against that congresswoman, and he had a tough time going to get in his first race against the State House incumbent. But with what he learned, he didn't let that deter him. He felt like he had a role to play in politics, and he came back and he fought for it and he won.
Yeah, that's a great story, and it's a great lesson for candidates. Don't be afraid to lose. Just make sure that you learn the right lessons, that you build a system that allows you to grow your supporters list, that builds your name ID, that builds your favorability among the audience that you're among the voters that you're seeking to support you. I mean, learn those lessons and you'll come out stronger. I've seen this happen time and time again, and that's a great example that you provided of that working out for a candidate.
Yeah, there's good ways and bad ways to lose. I've seen candidates lose elections where there's no way they could ever run again or have a single supporter. And there's also guys like the one I mentioned that he fought hard, he did things right, and he positioned himself well for the future. Just make sure you're one of those guys.
Absolutely.
Now, talking to our listeners that are considering a run for public office, the ones that they don't really have much name ID, this is their first run, what are some of the things they could be doing now to prepare for that eventual run, whether it's for school board or city councilman, state house? What can they do today in the next few months to prepare them for a run in the future cycle?
That's a good question, and I always advise potential future candidates to start early, to start organizing their efforts, keeping track of potential supporters and donors, looking for opportunities to go and speak to organizations about a cause that you care about. So, for example, there might be a bond issue, there might be a school board issue that you can talk about and you can lead on, and maybe by being an activist, you can get in front of a lot of people to talk about an issue you care about. And that can then launch you into a political campaign in the future. I've seen that happen time and time again. But again, setting up some of these basic levels of infrastructure is really important, and doing that early before you're a candidate. I think a lot of times people are skeptical about candidates and about first-time candidates. And so if the first time you meet somebody who's a community leader, is when you're running for office, they're already going to be a little bit skeptical and standoffish. But if you've gone to that local chamber event, every month, for the last year, if you've gone to the Rotary Club, if you've gone to high school football games in your community, if you've been active in political circles and you've gone to the Republican clubs and the Tea Party meetings, if you've been a face that they're familiar with and they've seen you speak about issues that you care about, you're already going to have an advantage to someone who's trying to come in new without any connections, without any name ID, and who's just trying to run for office. So I would really encourage folks who are looking at running locally to get involved in the community, get involved in a volunteer capacity, go to local festivals and events and gatherings and just meet people, just meet everybody you can and keep track of them. And if you get business cards, you get email addresses, put them in a database, just put it in an Excel sheet if you need to remember who you met with. Some of the old school ways of staying in touch with people are things like Christmas cards or handwritten notes, or just connecting with people in the modern day on Facebook and just, putting out information about issues you care about. Those are the ways to really connect with people far in advance of running for office. I'll go back to the example of my mom, but, she was active in the community for 30 years, doing things behind the scenes, helping people, bringing food to people, delivering communion to the homebound on Sundays. People knew who she was and the work that she had done, and she never thought about running for office actually until she finally was motivated to do so. But when she did overwhelmingly well, and that's because of all the goodwill that she built over those 30 years.
That is absolutely critical advice. I have seen far too many candidates that, the people at the Tea Party or the 912 or the Republican Club, these candidates show up and they're like, guys, we've been meeting here for years, and this is the first time I've met you. Why should I trust you, let alone vote for you? And people that, if you know you're running, you want to run, if you know that you have the idea in your head that you're going to run for public office at some point, get out there, get involved. They should know who you are and be supporters of you before you ever mention the concept of running for office. And that's a wasted time if you don't do that now. Absolutely agree.
Yeah, I think it's advisable for potential candidates to go and volunteer on campaigns, right, and put out yard signs and knock on doors and phone bank for other candidates and learn how to do that. Learn how to campaign for somebody else, and too, if you're campaigning for one of your favorite state reps and state senators, and they know you and they know that you've been helpful, and you go to their fundraisers if you can afford to give them some money and go to their fundraisers and support them, you'll meet their donors, and then also, when it comes time to run for local office, perhaps they're more likely to support you and endorse you and allow you to use their machine, for that uber local race that you're running in. So there are things like that I think sometimes people fail to do, and they think that they can just wait until they're ready to run for office. And then a lot of times you see that just doesn't work.
Yeah, when you're running as a first-time candidate, you're starting from zero name ID and zero money and zero donors. And everything you can do from networking to showing your work ethic on those other campaigns, that'll help to get that number above zero by some margin before you ever pull the trigger on your race. And that's things you cannot make up after the fact. Now, pivoting a little bit over to the staff side, I know that you do a lot with these organizations and campaigns you work with for helping them identify and hiring staff and vetting people. What are some of the key things that you look for when you're looking at a pool of potential staff and trying to find people that are going to fit well with that organization?
Yeah, that's a good question, and we do a lot of that. We're always looking for good help with our organizations or with our campaigns, and it really is sort of a mix of attributes and skill sets. One of the most important things is just work ethic. I love looking at the resumes and seeing people that have worked at a restaurant, for example, or something where they've had to deal with the public, retail, something like that, where people have actually interacted with the voters, as consumers. And I think that teaches you so much about politics and about people. So I look for work ethic. I look for people that obviously share our values and have a general understanding of conservative ideas. Can they articulate those ideas? I think that's important. And certainly, are they familiar with the candidate and why that person's running, how it fits into the bigger questions and the bigger system in terms of government. So having an idea of why the person's running, being able to articulate their ideas, and then being willing to work and to learn. I think that people can be taught a lot of the things that are important in politics. You can be taught how to do digital marketing and grassroots and fundraising and all the things that we kind of need to do, the blocking and tackling. You can be taught how to use technology to talk to voters and how to do other things that are necessary. But what you can't teach is really a good attitude and a hard working. What you can't teach is a good attitude and hard work. I think those are the two things that I really look for, especially with the young people that I'm hiring. People right out of college. We look at what did you do in college? Did you volunteer on campaigns? Did you work a job to help pay for tuition? Or did you just do your fraternity or your sorority? And those things do matter, because somebody who is really active, somebody who's had to kind of deal with the public in a setting like that, I think can really bring a certain skill set to a candidate or a cause. And, again, most of the people that we work with who are young, who come right out of college or sort of mid-level, they have those attributes, and that's what really allows them to do the job and do it well.
I love that tip about finding people with retail and restaurant experience. It just gave me a great idea. I think all future hiring I'm going to do, I'm going to pull people, I'm going to go poach people from Chick-fil-A.
Absolutely.
They have great training, and I'm just going to go hire people away from Chick-fil-A, and they can be on my grassroots folks, and I'm going to win every campaign I go out on. That's my new recipe for victory right there.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's just, people that understand how to talk to people and how to deal with getting something done on a timeline. When you have hungry people that are showing up demanding their food, and you have to calmly and politely try and get that done as quickly as possible. I mean, that's a lot of what politics is. It's a lot of what constituent work is when you actually get elected, is dealing with folks that are upset and need your help or need something from you. So having patience and having a good attitude and liking people, I think, is essential to anything that you do in politics.
Yeah, if you can make me happy when my chicken biscuit's not ready on time, then you can get somebody to vote for me. That's for sure. One is way easier than the other. Now, Brendan, ultimately what we're talking about here is getting registered voters to come over to your side and buy in, to invest at least their vote, if not their money and time, in your campaign, your cause. And that can be a tricky thing. It obviously matters what you're trying to sell, kind of what your product is, whether it's a candidate or organization or a piece of legislation. How do you go about looking at that message and crafting your message for how you're going to move those voters from either opposition or indifference to being proponents and ideally heavily involved?
I think that's an important question. And one of the ways that I try and tackle this is by actually doing what people have termed a data-driven campaign. And so the idea that you listen to your audience, you listen to your voters, and you try and understand what motivates them, what doesn't motivate them, the issues that they care about, so that you can provide answers to how your candidate or your cause will take care of that, will answer those questions, will fight for the things that they believe in. And so some of this can be done through, of course, polling, which is very expensive, and you might do in a statewide race, for example, or you may do in a congressional race, but you can also do this online. You can do this by doing polls and surveys and petitions online onto your Facebook community, when you email out to your list, and you can say, rank the issues that you care about. Property taxes, school choice, criminal justice reform. You can give them options, and you can say, and tell us about an issue that you care about that's not on the list. You can also ask their opinions about you as a candidate, and you can say, as your elected official or as a candidate, what are you looking for? Is it honesty and trustworthiness? Is it public policy positions? Is it something else? Is it just listening to your constituents? So you can learn a lot from the voters by asking them questions. And we do a lot of this on all of our campaigns, and it's really fascinating to see what comes back. And then we can actually go to our client and say, here's what your Facebook fans are saying. Here's what your voters overall are saying through polling. We've done some auto dial polls where we call out to voters in the district and ask them these questions, and that information comes back. So we try and compile all that in a database so that we can look at who our voters are, who our audience is. We're basically selling a product, the candidate or the cause, so we want to make sure that they're willing to buy what we're selling. And then the other thing you can do as you build that list and you build that out, and you have more and more data points about what people believe and why they believe it, then you can start segmenting your messages, and you can say, okay, here are the folks that care about property taxes, number one, and it's the only reason that they're active in politics. And you can email them, messages just on property taxes. And when you call them, you can lead with property taxes. And then you can have your gun owners and gun rights advocates in another segment on your email list or on your voter data set. And then you can call them and talk to them about the issue that they care about and talk about how your candidate will fight to protect their Second Amendment rights. So this is something that's been happening a lot, I think, in campaigns over the last 4 to 6 years, kind of the idea of segmentation and the idea of communicating to audiences what they want to hear about. And it's a very bottom-up approach and not a top-down approach. And I think it's actually really healthy for democracy, healthy for our republic, to have the voters be able to have their elected officials understand what they care about and listen to them, and have the elected officials try and give them specifics on the issues they care about.
One of the things I really like about that strategy, especially assembling from your conversations and from the surveys of voters, getting a feel for what they actually care about, is that it breaks down a lot of those preconceived notions that candidates have. Because as a candidate, I have my reasons for why I'm running and what's important to me. And that's kind of my default setting when I go to you, Brendan, and talk to you about why you should vote for me. But your issues might very well be, while they might be compatible, if I care about guns and you care about property taxes, I'd much rather know that that's your lead issue. So I don't start talking about guns when you don't care. You just want your property taxes lower.
Exactly. And it's not to say that you don't go and give your stump speech and talk about a little bit of all these things, but when you're talking to voters directly on email, phone, at the door, that data point, and you can lead with that. So they're having a conversation with you, and they may ask you about another issue, or they may not, or you may say, okay, I'm glad that you're with me on property taxes. I want to tell you something else that's really important to me and why I'm running. And it allows you to have that conversation. But I've seen a lot of candidates who think that, if they just talk about what they're passionate about, that they can persuade everybody to come their way. And it's a harder way to approach it. It just doesn't have the success rate that doing it this way has. And the other interesting thing about building this kind of data is that when you do it at a high level, when you do have thousands and thousands of people who are participating in such a system, you actually will see how accurate the polling will be when you just take this data and line it up with that. There were so many times on one of the statewide campaigns I worked on where we would do this, and we would find that if you polled people, you would get essentially the same data back. It wasn't, I could tell you, what Republican primary voters in Texas think about this issue or that issue, and why they think that, and how they rank the issues that they care about. So the public polling and the internal polling was lining up with what we were finding internally on a less scientific approach, but one that is basically listening to your audience. And I just think that's a very powerful thing, and it's a change from the old days where parties and candidates sort of put out their ideas and said, this is what we're for, this is what we're against. And then the voters didn't have really a great way of communicating back and saying, well, this is what we actually care about. These are our priorities.
One of the great things about that is that I've seen it also save campaigns a lot of money, especially looking at a local campaign or a state house race. Going out, you need to be talking to voters. You need to be talking to them about what they care about so you can gather that information. And as you do that, first of all, it mitigates the need for polling on those small races, and it gives you that strength of knowing that you actually care about what the voters care about. And it's going to save you a ton of money as far as every piece of advertising you put out, because you can micro-target, like you were talking about, and segment your list down. So you don't have to give everybody 5 mail pieces and just hope that they hit right. You can break those down into much smaller segments and message directly to those people what they care most about.
Yeah, absolutely. And now the voter data companies and third parties are getting better and better at grabbing the voting histories of the voters and then adding things like consumer data, to really get a better idea of who these people are and what they care about. But then when you do the direct communication at the door and on the phone, you hear from them directly. You're able to add notes to them as individuals. You're able to individualize the messaging almost, which is a really powerful tool. And I think, again, it's very healthy for our system of government that the people have more say, more power, and than they did in the past. I think that's a really good thing, especially when it relates to Congress, people who are in Washington, D.C., who are geographically and sometimes culturally very far away from their constituents.
We were just talking to one guy yesterday that's a client of ours that's going to be running for school board at some point in the near future. And one of the cool things he's actually going to be doing is breaking down his voter data and having appended to that whether somebody has children, whether they own their own home, and potentially the ages of those children. You get the rough ages from some data companies. And in the district he's running in, there are different challenges for the different levels of schooling. And so he's literally going to target those messages to people based on the school that their kids are fixing to go into and trying to solve the specific problems that they already know exist, but that they don't understand what the solution could be. And I feel like that's going to be, having access to that data, like you said, is a very, very new, recent advented thing. And I think that kind of micro-targeting with very little cost can have some incredible results. Just be a little bit creative about it. So Brendan, looking back on the years you've been involved, you got well over a decade at this point involved in working in politics. If you were to go back, kind of a back to the future type scenario, going back to give yourself some advice, what would you tell yourself as you're kind of starting this entrepreneurial and political journey?
Well, I have learned a lot over those years, and you start out, as my old boss Dick Armey said, as a young idealist, and often you become an old cynic. And I think that it's hard not to sometimes, but I really try not to. I really try and remain optimistic about the future of our country, about conservative ideas, about politics in general. But going back, I would tell myself, be patient, really take the long view and make decisions that are good for the long term. It's very easy in politics to make short-term decisions, to do what you think is right now, but it turns out to be a bad decision in the future. But if you're going to get involved in this business as a consultant or as a person who works on campaigns, your reputation matters a great deal. So maintain your integrity, maintain your reputation. I always tell people to be friendly to your interns. You may end up working for them.
Yes.
One of my former interns is now an editorial board writer for the Wall Street Journal. Others have gone on to do great work in their own right, and I was always friendly to them, and I always appreciated the work that they did. So I think being friendly in general and building good relationships with people, even if they're your adversaries on a campaign, is really important. I can't tell you how many times that I've been on the other side of an issue or a campaign with somebody who might not have been happy at the time that we were on different sides of something, but ended up, coming around and saying, that really wasn't personal, and that really wasn't that important, that we ended up on the other side of this race or this issue. And so I think you really just have to, be a happy warrior, and know that people are going to move in and out of jobs. They're going to move in and out of campaigns or nonprofits. You'll be working with people who you thought you'd never work with. And so I think just making sure that you're kind and friendly, and that you respect people, I think that leads to more respect for you. And so that would be my advice to any kind of young activist or young potential operative who's getting involved in this, is just don't make it personal. Don't personalize it. If you find yourself on the other side of an issue, or you find yourself on the other side of a primary campaign, for example, at the end of the day, if everybody's trying to approach this in a way that helps the conservative movement, that helps improve our country and our state, give them the benefit of the doubt, and hopefully they'll do the same for you.
Fantastic advice. Where can people find you online if they want to continue the conversation or have questions for you?
Sure. I'd love to talk more with anybody that's interested in running for office or who's looking to work on a campaign or with one of our nonprofits. And you can find us at our company website, SteinhauserStrategies.com. I'm also, of course, very active on Facebook, opining about the elections and about every other issue known to man. So would be more than happy to connect with folks who are interested. I really enjoy just getting coffee with young operatives and young consultants and folks that want to run for office. I really enjoy talking with people and trying to share some of my experience, because I've had good mentors. I've had people that I've really looked up to who've taken the time to talk to me about politics and about life, frankly, and about some of the things that come up. So I'd be more than happy to talk with anybody that's interested in getting involved in this life.
Well, listeners, I hope you'll take advantage of that. Brendan's a great guy and has some awesome advice that I'm sure he'd be willing to share with you. I really appreciate, Brendan, you being on here today. And thank you to Campaign Sidekick, our sponsor. Check out the show notes here on the post. We'll have Brendan's contact information and many of the links and reference from the show, as well as his organization and some of the groups he's worked with. And we'll talk to you all again next week.
Please subscribe and rate us on iTunes to help spread the word. We'll be back with you next week with more campaign insights from My Campaign Coach.